Thank you, Anne. We're very happy to be here, especially that I'm presenting after a wealth of information that we had yesterday. I'm happy to be presenting today with almost all the faces are familiar, and we've had some interesting discussions over the course of the day yesterday, and hopefully we'll follow on with that. I will just walk you really quickly through our experience with Egypt, which is an experience that's still growing. We're taking baby steps. I work for the IOM Egypt Country Office as a research and capacity building coordinator. In general, I deal with projects that are related to labor mobility and labor migration, but the biggest chunk of my work has been focused on capacity building and working with the National Statistical Office of Egypt, which is CAPMAS. So just to give you a bit of context about Egypt, our population is insanely growing. So it has increased from 20 million to 94 million in 2017. The forecasts predict that it will continue to grow to almost reach more than 200 million by 2100. Which means a 1.5 million growth rate per year. The population is quite young, so you have 33% of the population under the age of 35, which means that we have a lot of the population within the working age population, almost increases by 3.1% each year. The employment, on the other hand, increases by only 0.9%, which means that we have an excess of labor that is estimated around 750,000 young people per year. And the job market does not really expand with a matching speed to accommodate all of the entries to the labor market. The number of Egyptians living abroad is quite interesting. It's more than 9 million, which is the official estimates. The minister herself, the Minister of Immigration, says that she predicts that this actually goes up to 12 million. But, you know, as you're well aware, we can only estimate the official numbers who are registered abroad in the consulates. The interesting part is that the official statistics from the National Statistical Office about the number of people living in Egypt, the foreigners, is only 889,000 foreigners working in Egypt. So with that numbers, you can see that we have many issues on the table, many interests, many priorities for the government and for us as researchers and working in the international development arena in general. Because also Egypt is a very interesting country at crossroads. It's a country of origin, a country of transit, and a country of destination. And why do I have a question mark on the country of destination? Because it's interesting. If you want to know how many immigrants in general living in Egypt, so the estimate is 5 million. But again, it's an estimate. Not everyone is registered. Not all of them are regular migrants. So we don't know for sure. We just can tell that is around 5 million. Of which 217,000 are refugees, according to the UNHCR statistics, of which 126 or 500,000 are Syrians. And you can see the discrepancy between the official number and the estimates by the government. So the government says that almost 500,000 of Syrians are living in Egypt. And why exactly I'm focusing on Syrians? Even also we have large percentage of Sudanese, Ethiopians, Eritreans, and South Sudanese are living in Egypt. But in 2017, the UNDP and the ILO published an interesting study stating that the Syrians or Egypt have contributed with almost $800 million to the economy. So keeping that in mind, it seems like there's a lot to be done in Egypt. We have numerous counterparts. We work with government counterparts. We work with non-governmental organizations. But when it comes to data, we only focus on working with the governments because A, they're the single contact point and the official point of reference for data. B, data is a very sensitive issue in Egypt, and everything comes with security concerns label on it. So we have to work with the government, and especially that the legal framework governing the work of NGOs is a bit unclear in some areas, which might cause issues with our work. It's important to know that Egypt as a country is highly centralized in the capital, and the government apparatus is not really different, so it's also highly centralized with a number of key stakeholders. So we have a very long list of stakeholders that we work with generally. The ones in bold are the most recurrent. But we also work mainly on statistics, as I said, with the National Statistical Office, the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, CAPMAS. CAPMAS was established back in the 60s, so it's a organization with a long history, a huge organization, as most of the institutions quite overstaffed. It's dealing with data collection, analysis, and reporting, and it produces a number of periodic reports, including all of which that we have discussed yesterday. So they have regular labor force surveys every 3 months. We have the household income, expenditures, consumption surveys, poverty surveys, and in addition, they also work on specialized surveys. They have worked on the first round of the household international migration surveys. And of course, they work on the census. So before we delve into our work and the efforts that we have been trying to make in the few past years about institutional capacity building of CAPMAS, let's reflect a bit on this definition, which is what is institutional capacity? It is the sum of organizational structure, technical system, as well as individual competencies that create and implement policies in response to the need of the public. So you have 3 elements defining institutional capacities here: the organization, the system, and the individual, with some keywords to create policies that meet special or certain needs and priorities of the public and the government. With that said, we started working with CAPMAS in 2013, the first household international migration survey, which took 3 years to be released. So it has been started on 2013, but the official publication came out in 2016. So 3 years later already the data started being outdated in a way. If you're well aware with the HIMSS survey is one of the most comprehensive surveys a country could have because it tackles all dimensions of migration and the behavior, the attitudes, the aspirations, the effects, everything. So it's very comprehensive in nature. It's a very rich source for any policymaker, for anyone to understand what is the situation in a country. But of course, as you have already discussed yesterday, it's a very costly exercise. So when Egypt was part of this exercise, it was funded by the European Union, and it was part of a more regional initiative, which is the Mediterranean HIMSS. So of course, up to this point, we could not manage to get the second round of HIMSS, and I'll speak about that later. The infamous census. So what kind of support that IOM Egypt was trying to give to CAPMAS when it comes to the census, the last census of 2017? So we had our discussions with the government to include 2 questions in the census. One is on the nationality, and the second one on the purpose of state. So after the census concluded in September 2017, the official data was published later that month, but we did not manage to get any data with regards to the foreign population living in Egypt throughout the data collected from the census. When we discussed with the government, the answer was quite hazy, to be honest. So we don't know if the outcomes of the survey were not adequate for analysis, or simply the government is not ready to share such information, labeling it as confidential or security information. So we started working in CAPMAS back in 2016 with the initial trainings on forecasting labor market demands. An international consultant, a labor market expert, came to Egypt and started providing a couple of workshops to the team of CAPMAS statisticians, and they started understanding how to combine demographic data with labor market data to understand at a given point of time what are the supply and demand of the labor market and what could probably the future needs. So they worked on understanding how to analyze the market dynamics and also how to forecast the needs. Following that, in 2017, we supported CAPMAS to establish the very first unit dedicated to migration data analysis. It was established based on the request of CAPMAS, which is a very positive initiative indicating a buy-in from the government and ownership of this unit. And from this point onward, we focused our work with the unit. In April also, we had an exchange visit from officials from Egypt, but not only from CAPMAS, also from Ministries of Labor and Ministries of Immigration and Expatriates Affairs, going to Germany and understanding how the system works in Germany, how the data is collected. And then later on at this year, the team of the unit started working on drafting the first Egypt labor market report, which is a very interesting report, an early effort to continue working on a series like that. The report mainly analyzes the labor market in Egypt, but also they used data from the Eurostat to analyze the labor market demands in 4 European countries, Germany, France, UK, and Italy. And we have chosen the countries that are usually countries of destinations for Egyptians. The main conclusion of this report is that Egypt, as a young population, will continue to have a surplus in youth trying to get to the market. And on the other hand, and that due to the aging population, and as Bella spoke yesterday about demographic interplays, will continue to have a shortage, excess shortage of labor. So the main conclusion is that governments at both sides of the Mediterranean have the opportunity to collaborate on designing demand-driven policies aiming at preventing irregular migration on one side through promoting regular channels of migration. And to promote regular channels of migration, you have to understand the labor market, you have to have the data to guide your way, you have to work on policies like education policies and empowerment policies, supporting industrial growth in Egypt, for instance, amongst other factors. So the report was published in 2018, and we started focusing more on data related to SDGs, because Egypt is one of few countries in the area that works on voluntary national reports. We started working on drafting the reports on progress made towards the SDGs. So amongst the trainings that the unit had was a training on migration data and international sources for SDGs. Migration and development. The two trainings were supported by our colleagues from GMDAC. We also had a training on administrative sources for statistics on international migration, a training on basics of scientific research. And the reason is, like, there are two types of units in CAPMAS. Units that deal with primary data and units that deal with the processing of data and reporting on it. So our unit, the Migration Data Analysis Unit, works mainly on the analysis part. So they are mandated to create reports, to inform policymakers, and for that they need to understand how to design a research question, present a paper, design a methodology, use more of qualitative data, the use of international resources, and so forth. So we had to tie our trainings to a certain output, and the agreement was that the unit will start working on the very first migration bulletin, which resembles in structure the migration data profiles that we'll be talking on later this evening or Wednesday. Very interesting publication. I would encourage you to attend this session because it covers four areas. The first is the demographic data of any countries. The second is the market, the migration and development, which includes the markets and so on. The third is the legislative framework, and the fourth is the recommendations. So we started working on the tomorrow morning. Okay. So we started working on the bulletin. We had our first draft. Everything's fine and seems promising at this point. But actually, no. As simple as it seems, you have a structure and you just fill it with data, but we just did not get the results that we wanted, which made us reflect a bit on the means that we are approaching capacity building through. So why didn't we reach a very comprehensive and nice publication from the first trial? It's a complicated publication, even though it seems simple, even though we have indicators, but in the profile in itself is a very good capacity building tool, because we keep going back to the unit and have our consultations with them and why we don't present this indicators, why we don't present that indicators. So the lessons learned from this exercise is that the administrative data is a wealth of data in itself, and we should capitalize more on it. And it's not only about collection of data, but also how the data is processed. The second thing is that the unit does not work in isolation with other units from the CAPMAS entity, and also there are other governmental organizations that might be collecting more data than what they actually transfer to CAPMAS, or simply, for instance, the Ministry of Interior with dealing with the exit and entry cards. They could have more questions to disaggregate data. They could have more nuanced indicators to support our team in CAPMAS to generate the data needed. So we need to work more, not only in CAPMAS, but around CAPMAS and the ecosystem of it in order to support them reach their goal. Also, as challenging as it is, but we are trying to identify non-governmental organizations which have the credibility and the trustworthy. So you have some organizations that might not be working on direct data, statistics, and so on, but they would be very helpful when it comes to the interpretation of numbers that CAPMAS produce. One of which was the National Council for Population, and another centers that's not only working on the numbers and migration, like the National Center, for instance, but they also work on perceptions. So they devise small-scale studies to go to the field and collect primary data on the perception of youth, the perception of returnees, how was their experience, and so forth. And combining the statistics produced from CAPMAS and the kind of qualitative inputs from these NGOs or non-governmental entities would actually help us cover a bit the data gaps that we have. And also, we had a very positive experience with the UN agencies in Egypt, where we have a group for interagency collaboration. And through this group, we have exchanged a lot on the expertise, on the steps forward. We try to harmonize effort, not to duplicate what we're doing, and to also support different units, because, for instance, UNICEF has supported establishing a dedicated unit on SDGs recently in Egypt. So we work closely with that unit, and we kind of try to exchange the knowledge between the two units as much as possible. And finally, there is no escape from having a national dialogue and coordination. So in theory, the coordination mechanisms are in place. We have MOUs, we have legal acts regulating the coordination amongst the ministries, but there is more need for communication. As simple as it may seem, but a simple meeting on a regular basis might yield higher results, and that's what we're aiming for the next period. Probably, hopefully, early August we'll have a first meeting, which hopefully would be a seed for a national coordinating committee on data related to migration. It's still very early to tell, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. The outlook for the future, as we see from this point, that there's an increasing interest and need for data on other policy areas rather than only labor markets. Labor market is occupying the largest space of policymakers in Egypt for the time being. They want to create jobs. They want to find a way to create jobs, whether locally or internationally, short-term or longer-term mobility schemes. It's of a great interest to the policymakers. So the first reaction we got after we introduced the findings from the labor market report: what about the exact occupation? You're giving us sectors. What about the skills level? What about the actual jobs that are there? So there's appetite for more data with regards to regular migration. Also, they're interested to know more about the dynamics of internal migration. And not next month, next week actually, we'll have a training supported by the colleagues from the GMDAC on internal migration, and also we'll be presenting the tools of IOM. My dear colleague Lorenza will be giving them an overview about the DTM, the displacement tracking matrix, and she will speak further about it this afternoon. For the first time, we have a cooperation agreement, which is not very sophisticated. It's just a table stating what are we going to do this year, and accordingly what kind of trainings we need and what kind of publications are expected to be produced. So it's a very first step towards a more structured approach with consultation with the government and capacity building. They're also interested on expatriates engagement, and ethical recruitment is one area that we need to be working on, whether it's for immigrants in Egypt or Egyptians working abroad. And of course, they are interested for a second round of hints and the production of policy papers. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. And it's time for questions, but actually you're not the one who get to ask the questions. I am benefiting from my presence here with this very rich room of expertise, and I have a question for you and for us all to discuss. If we're looking into more innovative approaches to capacity building, what should we be considering? So far we try to have our trainings as practical as much as possible, case studies, group exercises, you name it. And we also try to devise in between the trainings on-the-job coaching. But I think we need to have a more innovative approach and to have more tools for capacity building, especially that we have more projects in the future with regards to data and statistics, and also with regards to labor migration. So I concluded this at this point, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. But first, help me with my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is a marvellous example, really, of how in one country, you face the challenges of both organising, first assessing the scale of what needs to be done, and then organising it, and then finding out how it's going to work. That writ large in a global regional level is what I will be talking about in relation to ECOWAS. So the same issues arise when they're looking at the national policy challenges and the data collection and statistical challenges. So I think I'll throw the floor open for people to comment. If there's any comments from CAPMAS as well, if you'd like to make some comments there, you're very welcome to join us.
No, I think this was a wonderful example of census issues, migration data, how it works out in countries, challenges, etc. And I think what I would like to, I was particularly interested in your finding that we should leverage more the administrative data. And so you correctly identified sources for those data. My question is, for example, the Ministry of the Interior controls the the entry visas, I guess, and the Labor Ministry has the permits on labor migrants going abroad. And now, do those ministries themselves publish the data? Do they put them on the website? Is there an agreement that CAPMAS will do that? I've been looking very often for the administrative data from Egypt, and I cannot find them. It's really a pity. So what is the strategy? What is the agreed way forward? As you say, those data are very rich. They give us an indication about who is going out, what are the characteristics of people going out, what are the types of visa being issued, who's coming in, for what reason, etc., etc. And then maybe I wasn't paying attention, but maybe the colleague from CAPMAS can elaborate a little bit on why the migration data has not yet been released. You said it was cloudy or so, or something like that. So maybe some of those clouds can be cleared up soon, and just to hear what the practical issues are, because some of the colleagues may learn from that and maybe can avoid that in their countries going forward.
Just a small question that, yes, the question has been already asked about why that CAPMAS is delaying the release of information census from census. But you also made a presentation about this Egypt hymns, mid hymns, yeah. So it took 3 years for the publication to be released. It is what is been originally scheduled, or it took longer than expected. If that's the case, what the reason for the delay? I'm just curious, especially knowing that you had these difficulties encounter in releasing a census.
So the question, if I'm recalling accurately, is the ministries themselves do not publish the administrative data they gather on their websites. Some of them put key figures. For instance, Ministry of Labor is keen to put like key figures on the website, but there are very few figures, so they don't publish themselves. There are agreements between CAPMAS and the ministries. So CAPMAS as an entity is like a ministry. It is directly under the supervision of the Prime Minister, and they are mandated with anything related to data. So they are mandated to get the data all the line ministries collect. When it comes to administrative data, the Ministry of Interior is an example, but also think of ministries of health where they provide services to Egyptians and non-Egyptians. And usually you don't have the admission applications disaggregated by Egyptian or non-Egyptian, or the purpose of their stay. So the Ministry of Education, on the other hand, they have a better set of data because they needed that disaggregation, so they have it. So what we mean by enhancing coordination and communication is just to go back to some of the already existing applications and forums, and just to add a question on the nationality, on the purpose of stay, where it's feasible. If that answers your question in a way. The issue is that we've been facing some of challenges when it comes to reporting on SDGs, because most of the indicators that are related to migration, of course, needs to be disaggregated by migratory status. And this disaggregation is the first start to enhance the set of data that CAPMAS receives and can report on. So this is for the administrative data. For the census data, would you like to answer, or? Okay, because we were just discussing that, and it's not even clear for the team within CAPMAS why they don't get the data. So our unit is the unit dealing with the processing of data, and the answer that we got is like, you will get it. So what about the data that has been collected through the census, the information? You will get it. It will be. Okay. So for the Egyptians residing abroad, all the information was gathered through Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and for the foreigners residing in Egypt, you have the official statistics from Ministry of Manpower. But for the exact findings of the census about the questions that has been introduced, we did not get any data, and the answer is, you'll get it. So we don't know. Probably it is a security concern for the time being. But what's the purpose? It's very tricky to enter into this discussion at this time, especially that there has been a change in leadership in CAPMAS, and CAPMAS has usually been headed by military generals. So they have the security at the back of their mind as the #1 flag. So at this point, we can't really pose so many questions about where is the data. Might do it in the future. Definitely we need to know in order to understand if there's a possibility to enhance the data gathered or not. For the HIMSS survey, the delay was a mix of both as far as we know. So it was, of course, the survey or the process starts with a long duration for capacity building and to train the enumerators and the officials working on the survey. But also from experience with the Egypt labor market report, the number of rounds of revision tends to infinity. So that's why it might take 3 years to just get the data of 1 year. I think I've answered all the questions so far.
Thank you very much. I think some of those questions about the points about the sensitivity are common to all countries and all regions, and they just illustrate really how data are political, not only in the generation of the data, but in the management, the collection, the management, and the decisions about which data can be made public, which are generated in the first place, and all those issues that come into play when you're trying to say you want some kind of independently accessible evidence base in order to inform policy discussions and civil society discussions. The reliance on official sources cannot be avoided. So it illustrates a very important tension that we're all aware of, and it's not unique to Egypt by any means. I wonder if there are any final observations before we go for a break. Yes, Nina, please.
I'm just wondering about whether you can explain a bit more about why there is a high portion of immigrants like in from Egypt. Like I remember, if I remember correctly, there are about like between 5 million to 12 million immigrants, like in like international, like Egypt nationals living abroad. Could you explain a bit more about why there is a huge number of people living abroad? Thank you very much.
So historically speaking, migration legislation was issued in the 80s, and it opened the door for Egyptians to start migrating, maintaining their rights as citizenship. So from this point, a lot of people started migrating, especially to the Gulf areas, looking for better opportunities. So the economic reason was the number one reason, given that the breakdown of Egyptians residing abroad up to this date mainly are concentrated in areas around the Gulf, and then European countries for two reasons. It's either also economic reasons or for education, and then also you found a significant percentage in North America and other countries around the world. So it's a mix of everything, actually, economic, education, and other reasons amongst.
So thank you very much. Time for a break.